Under the pale light of the human colony's artificial dawn, she walked slowly through the empty streets, her steps heavy and her stomach gnawing with hunger. Once again, she had gone 2 days without a proper meal. Her kind had never been welcome. Here and now that she was widowed with no clan and no protector, she was worse than invisible. She was pitied by none, shunned by many, and treated as if she were a shadow. Clinging to the walls she once carried herself with pride, her head high and her eyes sharp, but now the widow's gaze fell constantly to the ground, searching for scraps, searching for anything left behind by others. Her thin fingers trembled when she bent to pick at a discarded husk of fruit, and her heart ached when she realized it had already rotted away. The colony had once been built on ideals of trade and friendship between species, but ideals rarely survived when food was scarce and suspicion was plenty. The humans here tolerated aliens if they worked, if they served, if they paid their way, but a widow with no wealth and no weapons was considered dead weight. She had been turned away from stalls, mocked by traders, and shoved aside by patrolmen. The emptiness in her stomach was nothing compared to the emptiness. In her spirit, she had lost her mate to a pirate raid, and with him had gone her last link to belonging. That night, as she sat shivering behind a supply depot, she heard footsteps, soft and light. She braced herself, expecting mockery. Perhaps stones, thrown by cruel children, but instead a small voice spoke. "Hello, are you hungry?" The alien widow looked up in shock. A tiny human girl stood there, her hair messy from play, her hands clutching a piece of bread. The widow blinked. She thought surely this was some cruel trick the humans often played games with those they despised, but the girl stepped closer, her little hand outstretched. The widow shook her head slowly and whispered no, though her throat ached and her stomach burned. The word came out cracked and weak. She did not trust kindness, she did not trust anything anymore, but the girl did not move away. Instead, she tilted her head like a bird and pressed the bread closer. "You look sad," Mama always said. "When someone is sad, you give them something warm." The words pierced deeper than any insult. The widow's eyes stung, though she tried to keep her face blank. With trembling hands, she accepted the bread. Her pride screamed against it, but her body betrayed her. She bit into the soft crust, and the taste nearly broke her heart. She chewed slowly, savoring each bite, while tears she could no longer hold back blurred her vision. The little girl smiled as if she had given a treasure greater than gold. And then, without hesitation, she spoke the words that froze the widow's blood. "You should marry my dad, then you will never be hungry again." The widow nearly choked on the bread. Her eyes wide, her voice caught in her throat. She stared at the child who had spoken so simply, so innocently, that the words seemed like truth. The little girl giggled as if it were obvious. "He makes stew every night, and he tells stories too. He is lonely, and you look lonely too." The alien widow felt her chest twist painfully. She had not expected anything from this world, least of all a proposal from the lips of a child. She wanted to laugh, but no sound came. She wanted to cry, but she had no tears left. Her mind raced. She imagined the anger of the humans, the scorn of her own people, the impossibility of such a bond, yet beneath it all, there was a tiny ember of warmth she had not felt in years, an ember sparked by a simple piece of bread and the untainted words of a child who saw only need and offered only kindness. For the first time in many cycles, the widow felt her hunger ease, not just the hunger of her body, but the hollow hunger of her soul. She did not yet know what to say. She did not yet know what fate awaited. But in that moment, she realized the galaxy had not stripped her of every chance. Some hope still remained, and it had come to her from the most unlikely of places. A little girl with messy hair and too much heart to see a stranger starve. The alien widow sat in silence, staring at the little girl who had spoken words, so simple yet so dangerous. Her hand shook as she held the last crumbs of bread as if they were jewels she could not afford to lose. Her people had taught her that humans were cruel, opportunistic, and always looking for advantage. And yet here stood a child offering kindness without hesitation and speaking of marriage as though it were nothing more than a way to keep someone fed. Her heart beat heavily in her chest. She wanted to rise and flee from this absurd moment, but her weary legs would not obey. The girl tilted her head again, her wide human eyes shining in the dim light. "Do you not like stew?" she asked innocently. "My papa makes the best stew. Even the miners like it when they come to fix things at our home." The alien widow tried to form words, but her throat tightened. Every answer seemed dangerous if she dismissed the girl. The fragile bridge between them would crumble if she entertained the thought she would betray her own dignity. And yet she could not bring herself to speak harshly to this tiny spark of warmth, so she only whispered, "I do not understand your ways, child." The girl frowned a little, then crouched down closer to her, as though trying to understand the sadness behind her large alien eyes. "You do not have to understand. Papa says everyone deserves to eat. Papa says lonely people should not stay lonely." The widow flinched. The words pierced her. She remembered her own mate whispering similar things long ago in the safety of their home before the pirates, before the screams, before she had become a hollow shell of who she once was. She shook her head, fighting back memories, and said softly, "Your father will not want me." The girl blinked, confused. "Why not? He is kind. He is strong. And he helps everyone. In the neighborhood you can help him too. You are tall and strong. You can lift heavy things. I saw you carry that crate the other day." The widow was stunned. The child had been watching her. She had not noticed. She felt exposed and vulnerable, but also oddly seen, as if for the first time someone noticed something other than her hunger. Before she could answer, a deeper voice cut through the air, stern and protective. "Anna, what are you doing out here?" The girl turned and smiled. "Papa, look, I found a new friend. She was hungry, so I gave her bread." The widow's blood turned cold as the tall human man approached, his frame broad from labor, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes sharp with suspicion. He stepped between his daughter and the widow, his hand resting near the tool at his belt as though ready for trouble. The widow's stomach twisted. She had known this moment would come. The kindness of the child could not last forever under the gaze of adults. The man's voice was not cruel but firm. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing on her thin form. "You are one of the outsiders always hanging near the depot. What do you want with my daughter?" The widow lowered her gaze, unable to bear the accusation. "I wanted nothing," she whispered. "Your daughter gave me bread. I did not ask for it." His brow furrowed. He glanced down at Anna, who nodded eagerly. "It is true, Papa. She was so hungry. I told her she should marry you. Then she will never be hungry again." The widow gasped. The words had escaped the girl again, and now there was no taking them back. The father froze, his face unreadable. His eyes darted from the little girl to the alien woman who sat trembling on the ground. Shame and fear warred within the widow. She expected anger, perhaps even violence, but instead the man let out a slow breath, rubbing his brow. "Anna, you cannot say things like that. Marriage is not something you give away with bread." The girl pouted. "But Papa, she is sad, and she is hungry. And you are sad too. Why can you not be happy together?" The father shook his head, exasperated, while the widow felt her heart breaking. The simplicity of the child's hope was too much to bear. She rose slowly, her thin form shadowed in the dim light. "Forgive her," she said quietly. "I will not trouble you again." She turned to leave, but the father's voice stopped her wait. He studied her more closely now, seeing the trembling in her arms, the way she clutched the last crumbs as though they were life itself. He sighed heavily. "You truly have no food, do you?" The widow stiffened, pride clawed at her throat, but she could not lie. "No," she whispered, her voice small. He looked down at his daughter, then back at the widow. Then finally he spoke. "Come inside, just for tonight, no promises beyond that." The widow froze, unable to believe what she had heard. The girl beamed with joy, grabbing her alien hand without fear and tugging eagerly toward the small human dwelling. For the first time in many years, the widow stepped through a door not as a beggar but as a guest, unsure of what awaited but unable to resist the fragile warmth of a child's kindness. The small human home was warm, though simple. The alien widow felt the heat of the stove as she stepped cautiously through the doorway. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, and she stood stiffly near the entrance as though expecting at any moment to be thrown back into the cold night. The little girl darted about the room with excitement, pulling out chairs and fetching cups as if she had brought home a long-awaited guest. The father, however, stood near the stove, watching closely, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. The widow knew that look. It was the gaze of someone weighing risk against need, and she was the danger in his eye. She lowered herself into a corner seat, trying to make herself smaller, less threatening. She felt the pull of hunger when the man ladled stew into a bowl. The scent was rich with herbs and vegetables. Her stomach tightened painfully, but she forced herself to wait until the bowl was set in front of her. Only then did she raise the spoon and taste the broth. Warmth spread down her throat, and her body trembled at the relief. It was more than food. It was a reminder that life could still hold comfort. She ate slowly, aware of the man's steady gaze upon her. The girl leaned against the table, watching them both with innocent curiosity. She asked questions freely, as children do. "Where are you from? Why do you not have a family? What is your name?" The widow hesitated over each answer. Her language was heavy with accent, but she spoke enough to be understood. "My people called me Saliri," she said softly. "My mate was killed in the raid. My clan abandoned me." There was no need to say more. The girl's eyes grew round with sympathy while the father's narrowed with suspicion. When the meal was finished, Saliri placed her spoon down and folded her hands tightly. Her pride screamed at the humiliation of sitting like a beggar at a stranger's table. She forced herself to speak. "I will work for this food. I will not take charity." His brow furrowed at her words. "You think I would let you work near my child without knowing who you are?" he asked quietly, suspicion lacing his tone. Saliri bowed, her head the shame heavy upon her. "I have nothing to hide. I will leave at dawn if that is your wish." The little girl protested immediately. "No, Papa. She must stay. She can help me with lessons and carry heavy wood. You always complain about your back." Her father gave her a look that silenced her, though his expression softened slightly as he turned back to Saliri. "You should understand something," he said slowly. "Humans have suffered betrayal. Before, not everyone who comes to our gates means well. Your people have fought against us, have traded with raiders, have stolen from the desperate. What am I to think when a stranger suddenly sits in my house?" Saliri's throat tightened, the pain of his words cutting deep. She had no defense for the crimes of others. Her kind had indeed dealt with darkness, but she was not them still. She could not say so without sounding like every other beggar claiming innocence. Instead, she let silence stretch between them until finally she whispered, "I did not come to trick your family. I only wanted to survive." He studied her eyes, searching for deception. She did not look away. She had nothing left but truth. The girl slipped her hand into Saliri's without hesitation, and the alien woman felt her resolve crack. She had not touched another living being in months. The simple contact burned through her like fire. The father noticed the gesture and sighed heavily, his expression torn between distrust and the undeniable sincerity in her eyes. "You may stay for a time," he said finally, "but only under my watch. You will help with work. You will not be near her alone. Do you understand?" Saliri nodded quickly, relief washing over her, though pride still twisted in her chest. She had been given a chance, however small. It was she would prove herself worthy. She would not be cast out again. That night she lay on a small cot near the hearth, staring into the flickering embers. She listened to the girl's quiet breathing in the next room and the steady steps of the father as he checked locks and windows. Her heart ached with both shame and gratitude. She had been invited into warmth, but under suspicion, and she knew tomorrow would test her worth. Her battle was no longer only against hunger, but against the walls of mistrust that surrounded every human heart. The days that followed were filled with tension and unspoken tests. Saliri rose each morning before the sun lamps brightened the colony sky. She swept the floor, chopped wood, and carried heavy buckets. From the well, her hands grew blistered, but she welcomed the ache because it meant she was earning the place she had been given. The human father, whose name she learned was Daniel, watched her with quiet suspicion, his eyes never far from her movements. Every task she completed was measured. Every glance at his daughter was weighed. She felt the weight of his judgment, but she carried it without complaint. The little girl Anna became her constant companion, chattering endlessly as she followed Saliri. Through chores, Anna asked questions about her alien language, about her homeworld, about the stars, and about what it meant to love someone. Saleri struggled with the answers, her heart still raw with memories of her mate. She spoke slowly, telling the child only fragments of the life she had lost. Sometimes her voice faltered, but Anna always smiled and filled the silence with her own stories of school games and the books her father read at night. One evening, as they prepared supper, Daniel entered from the cold air outside, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. Saleri stood at the stove stirring the pot, while Anna set the table. Daniel paused in the doorway watching them, his face unreadable. The sight of an alien standing in his kitchen was still something he could not accept fully yet. He could not deny the difference she had made. The woodpile was fuller, the floors cleaner, and his daughter laughed more freely than she had since her mother's death. When the meal was done, they ate together in silence, Anna humming happily between spoonfuls. Saleri kept her gaze low, concentrating on her food. But she felt the father's eyes upon her at last. He spoke, his voice low but steady. "You work hard, harder than I expected." Saleri lifted her eyes, meeting his for a moment before lowering them again. "Survival leaves no room for idleness," she replied. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then asked, "What did you do before all this?" "Before the raids took everything." The question struck deep. Saleri's throat tightened. She hesitated, then answered softly, "I was a hunter among my people. I provided for my mate and for our clan. When the pirates came, he died fighting, and the clan turned their backs on me. They said a widow brought misfortune." Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. Daniel's expression darkened, not with pity, but with anger at the cruelty. He shook his head. "Harsh laws," he muttered. "No wonder you carry such weight in your eyes." The next day, as storm winds battered the colony, Saleri found herself repairing the roof with Daniel. He handed her tools while she steadied the boards, their movements awkward at first, but soon falling into rhythm. The work required trust. He had to rely on her strength while she relied on his balance. When the last plank was secured, they sat side by side for a brief moment, catching their breath. Rain pounding above them. Neither spoke, yet something subtle shifted. Daniel no longer looked at her as a trespasser, but as someone who had shared the burden of labor. That night, Anna curled against Saleri by the hearth, listening to the alien hum a song from her world. The girl's eyes grew heavy as she whispered, "You protect me, like Mama used to." Saleri froze, the ache in her chest nearly unbearable. She brushed a gentle hand over the child's hair and said softly, "I will protect you always." Daniel overheard from the doorway, his face unreadable but his heart stirring with conflicting emotions. The alien widow, who had entered his home as a burden, was becoming something he had not expected: a guardian to his daughter. A reminder that trust once broken could still be mended with patience and courage. Saleri lay awake long after the house grew quiet. Staring at the fading embers, she felt a new weight pressing on her chest. Not the crushing despair of hunger, but the fragile pull of belonging. It frightened her because she knew belonging could be taken away, yet she could not deny the warmth that grew each day in this small home, or the dangerous hope that whispered to her heart that perhaps she had not been cast out of the galaxy forever. Perhaps she had been led here for a reason. The news of an alien widow living in the home of a human spread quickly through the settlement. Whispers turned to stares, and stares turned to pointed words. When Saleri walked with Anna to the market, people pulled their children close, and traders grew silent, until she passed. Some muttered that it was dangerous. Others spat openly on the ground. Daniel felt the change as well. Old neighbors who once greeted him with nods now looked at him with suspicion. Men he had worked beside questioned his judgment behind his back. It was clear that the line he had crossed by offering her shelter was one few were willing to forgive. Saleri endured it in silence. She had known this would come, and yet the cruelty still stung. More than hunger. Ever had her pride forced her to stand tall, though she felt the sting of every glance. Anna, however, refused to be quiet. She clung to Saleri's hand and announced proudly to anyone who would listen that her new friend made the best stories at night, and that Papa's stew tasted better when she helped in the kitchen. Daniel tried to hush his daughter, but secretly he felt a strange pride that she defended the one everyone else scorned. One evening, as the three of them returned from the market, a pair of men blocked the path, their voices sharp and full of disdain. Daniel, what are you thinking? Bringing one of them into your house, have you forgotten the raids? Have you forgotten the blood spilled? Saliri's shoulders stiffened, her jaw tight, but she said nothing. Daniel placed himself between the men and his daughter, his voice steady. She is not a raider. She is not a thief. She works. She helps my family. She deserves to live as much as any of us. The men scoffed. One spat near Saliri's feet and growled, "You will regret this," before storming. That night, Daniel sat at the table, his hands pressed to his face, the weight of the settlement's disapproval pressing on him. Saliri moved quietly about the kitchen, though every sound felt loud in the silence. Finally she spoke, "If my presence brings danger to you and your child, I will leave her." Words were soft but carried the heavy burden of decision. Daniel looked up, his face drawn. "You think leaving will change their minds? Once fear sets in, it does not fade easily." He sighed and shook. His head. Anna ran to Saliri, throwing her small arms around her waist. "No, you cannot leave. You are my family now." The words cut through the air with innocence and finality. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at the alien widow standing in his kitchen, her hands trembling as she returned the child's embrace. His chest tightened because in that moment he saw not an intruder, but someone who had become part of their fragile world. The truth frightened him as much as it comforted him. The council called for Daniel the next day, voices stern and cold. They reminded him of the colony's laws. They warned that alliances with outsiders could not be trusted, and that harboring an alien without approval was reckless. He listened in silence, but when they demanded she be cast out, his jaw set firmly. "No, she stays. She has proven herself useful and loyal. She has saved me hours of work, and she has cared for Anna when I could not. If you call that a threat, then perhaps the threat lies in your fear, not in her presence." The council did not take kindly to his defiance. They issued no punishment, but their eyes promised consequences. Daniel returned home with a storm in his heart. Saliri read it in his face before he spoke. She whispered quietly, "I should never have entered your door." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "Perhaps you should have, but now that you have, I cannot imagine this house without you." As night fell over the colony, the family sat together near the hearth, Anna curled against Saliri, listening to a story of stars while Daniel mended tools in silence outside in the settlement. Shadows gathered and voices whispered. But inside the small home, something stronger was forming, a bond, not of blood or law, but of choice, a fragile unity that would soon be tested in ways none of them yet understood. The days that followed were tense yet strangely warm. The settlement's whispers never ceased. But inside Daniel's home, laughter and voices mingled freely. Anna's delight in teaching Saliri the ways of human life grew. Each day she pointed out flowers and fruits and vegetables, asking endless questions, while Saliri answered with patience and fascination. At times she would pause, as if absorbing every detail of a world so different from her own, and Daniel would watch them both, feeling an unfamiliar swell of contentment and fear, because the bond between them was growing stronger than any barrier the colony could impose. One morning, as the sun rose with pale golden light, Daniel noticed Saliri staring out of the window, her eyes distant as if seeing something beyond the horizon. He asked her quietly what she thought about, and she turned slowly, a shadow of sadness crossing her alien features. The child in her clutched tightly to her dress, and Daniel realized that even as she had become part of their home, she carried memories and pains that were entirely her own. She whispered, "I remember my husband. He was kind. He tried to protect me, but I failed to save him." And the words trembled in the air with a weight that made Daniel's heart ache. He moved closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "There are wounds that time cannot heal, but there are places that love can fill," he said softly, and Anna nodded vigorously, wrapping herself around Saliri as if to patch the gaps of her sorrow with pure innocence and warmth. Saliri allowed herself to be held, and in that simple embrace, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that the past was gone, but the future could still hold safety and perhaps even happiness. Word of Saliri's presence reached the outskirts of the colony, and not all the news was welcome. A group of young men arrived one evening, their faces set with mischief and malice. They mocked Daniel and demanded that he hand her over, claiming the colony's traditions forbade harboring outsiders. Daniel stood firm, refusing their threats, and when one of them reached out to push Anna, Saliri's body moved, with an agility and strength that startled everyone. She grabbed the boy and held him effortlessly pinned against the wall, her gaze cold and unwavering. The boy stammered apologies, and they all backed away murmuring about caution and fear, and Daniel realized that the stories the colony told about aliens and their power were only partially true. They had underestimated her. Anna clung to Saliri after they left, whispering, "You are the strongest person I know." And Saliri smiled, faintly brushing the hair from the child's face. She had learned the warmth of a new family, and yet she understood fully that their safety depended on her control over her power and her ability to protect them without bringing further harm or suspicion from the colony. She spent the night thinking about strategies and defenses while Daniel watched from his chair, grateful that the quiet terror had passed, but knowing it would not be the last challenge they faced. Days turned into weeks and routines settled, and Saliri helped with chores, cooked meals, learned stories of humans and their history, and in return Daniel and Anna shared their lives with her, and slowly the colony began to notice that she was more than an outsider. She was necessary. She mended broken tools, offered guidance in the garden, helped Anna with her lessons, and even the council began to acknowledge that her presence might be an asset rather than a threat. Yet under the surface, the tension never fully disappeared. Every glance from neighbors carried judgment. Every whisper reminded them of the precariousness of their position. One night a messenger arrived breathless from the edge of the settlement, bringing word of raiders spotted in the outer fields. Daniel and Saliri prepared to leave immediately, ensuring Anna's safety, and their hearts raced as they moved through the dark. The stars above shimmered cold and indifferent, while the wind carried the scent of danger closer than they had anticipated. Saliri's eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and Daniel realized fully that the world beyond their home would never accept her presence. But here, inside this fragile circle of trust, she had already become indispensable. They arrived at the field and saw the raiders moving with ruthless precision. Saliri's body moved with an elegance and speed that Daniel could not match. She disarmed and disabled them using minimal force and maximum effectiveness, teaching him silently the meaning of control and restraint. Yet the raiders fled, cursing and frightened, leaving behind only their terror, and Daniel felt a new respect not only for her power, but for her judgment and restraint. The bond between the human father, the little girl, and the alien widow had transformed from necessity into something formidable, unspoken, but undeniable. Returning home in the early hours, Daniel looked at Saliri as she helped Anna into bed and whispered quietly, "Your strength is not in your arms, it is in your heart." She paused, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and understanding, and nodded. Yes, and the weight of that acknowledgement settled over the room. A promise of protection, love, and unity. A fragile family forged in circumstances neither expected yet neither would ever forsake. The morning after the raid dawned with a golden light spilling across the fields, and Daniel felt a strange calm settle over the home that had been full of tension for so long. Saliri moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast with care, while Anna chattered endlessly about everything she had seen the day before, and the stories she had imagined about how her new family had saved the settlement from danger. Daniel watched them both, feeling the kind of contentment he had never known before, and he realized that despite all the challenges they had faced together, a sense of normalcy was finally possible. Saliri paused by the window, looking out at the horizon, her alien eyes thoughtful and distant. Anna noticed and asked what she was thinking about. Saliri smiled faintly and said about her home and her husband and the life she had lost. Yet she added softly, "But I have found a new life here, a life where I am needed and where I am loved." And Daniel felt a surge of gratitude, knowing that her words were more than gratitude. They were an acceptance of them as her family. The little girl ran to hug her, and Saliri embraced her fully, and without hesitation. It was a bond born of survival, trust, and affection that neither time nor circumstance could break. As the day went on, the settlement began to stir. and news of Saliri's bravery spread faster than any rumor of fear could. Daniel noticed neighbors giving her cautious, but respectful, nods, and even the council members who had once whispered about her presence approached with questions, seeking her advice on crop rotations and security improvements. Saliri answered calmly and intelligently, each word a reminder that she was not just a visitor, but a crucial part of their lives. Her knowledge and skill had become indispensable, and slowly the fear and suspicion that had clouded the community dissipated, leaving space for acceptance and admiration. That evening, as the sun dipped, below the horizon casting long shadows across the fields, Daniel and Saliri walked with Anna between them, holding her tiny hands, her laughter echoing in the quiet streets. The colony's lights flickered on, and families closed their doors, but still, they moved through the paths with confidence. Saliri's gaze scanned the surroundings, protective and alert, and Daniel knew that with her here no threat, whether from raiders or prejudice, would ever harm them again. It was a sense of security deeper than any walls or weapons could provide, a promise that their small family would endure. Later that night, as they settled in the living room with a warm fire crackling in the hearth, Anna snuggled against Saliri and whispered, "I'm glad you stayed with us," and Saliri kissed her forehead softly, saying, "I'm glad too," and Daniel, sitting in his chair, watched them and understood that this simple moment, this fragile but unbreakable bond, was everything they had been fighting for. The trials, the fear, the loss of the past had all led to this peace. A quiet acknowledgement that family is chosen as much as it is given, and that love can grow in the most unexpected places. Days turned into weeks and seasons shifted slowly. Saliri's presence transformed the household into a beacon for those in the colony who had feared or doubted her. Her efforts in education, security, and daily life became lessons not just in survival, but in coexistence. The humans learned from her patience, resilience, and perspective, while she absorbed the nuances of human life, laughing at their idiosyncrasies, sharing stories of distant worlds, and quietly shaping the little girl's understanding of courage, empathy, and the strength of heart over might. One evening, as they sat outside under the stars, Daniel asked Saliri if she had ever imagined that her life could be like this after all she had endured. And she looked at him, eyes reflecting the constellations above, and said, "Life is never what you expect, but sometimes what you need finds you when you least anticipate it." She smiled faintly, glancing at Anna asleep in the chair between them, and Daniel realized fully that their family, forged from desperation and kindness, had become something stronger than any bond of blood. It was trust, respect, and love, intertwined in ways the galaxy would never understand. And so, as the colony settled into the rhythm of life, and the dangers that once threatened them became stories to be told and remembered, Saliri, the alien widow who had once been hungry and alone, found warmth and belonging not in a distant world but in a home built with hearts open to her presence and the courage to accept the unexpected. And in the quiet of that night, Daniel, Anna, and Saliri knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together as a family, unbreakable, fearless, and full of hope. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of new beginnings. As the sun rose over the settlement, Daniel stretched and looked at Saliri and Anna sleeping peacefully side by side, and a sense of completeness washed over him, that feeling that all the chaos, the fear, and the trials had led them to this moment where life felt right and secure. Saliri stirred and opened her alien eyes, gazing at Daniel with a warmth that spoke of understanding and shared struggles. She reached out and held his hand, and in that simple touch there was gratitude and trust and a promise of loyalty that went deeper than words could ever express. Anna yawned and blinked her sleepy eyes and then giggled. Seeing the breakfast Daniel had prepared, it was simple but hearty, and it was made with love and care. And Saliri helped her with a few alien spices that made the food taste extraordinary in ways that delighted Anna, and Daniel watched them with a heart full of joy, knowing that the bond between them was unbreakable, forged through adversity and strengthened by kindness. Every laugh, every shared glance, every small act of care became a thread in the tapestry of their family life. The settlement around them had grown quieter yet fuller of life. People moved with purpose, and there was a sense of peace that had been earned, not given. The colony learned to see Saliri not as an outsider, but as a teacher, a protector, and a friend. and she embraced this role with dignity and humility, guiding them through challenges and celebrating every small victory with the warmth of someone who had known loss and understood the value of hope. That evening, the family gathered under the stars. Anna held a small toy she had received from a neighbor who had once doubted Saliri, and she proudly showed it to her mother figure, who smiled and whispered words of encouragement and love that filled the night with a calm that could only come from safety and belonging. Daniel sat beside them holding Saliri's hand, and he knew that they had created something remarkable. A life that was built not from convenience but from courage, care, and unwavering determination to protect one another. As the days flowed into weeks and the seasons changed, Saliri continued to thrive, teaching, learning, and nurturing the settlement, while also creating memories with Daniel and Anna. Every meal shared, every story told, every night spent gazing at the stars was a reminder that they had found what many search for, but few achieve: a home where hearts were open, trust was abundant, and love was unconditional. And then one night, as the moon cast silver light across the fields, Daniel, Saliri, and Anna sat quietly together, watching the gentle sway of the crops and the twinkling lights of distant homes. Saliri spoke softly about her past, about the world she had lost and the new world she had found here with them, and Daniel felt tears of gratitude well in his eyes, knowing that her journey had not only healed her, but had also strengthened the spirit of the settlement and of their little family that no longer feared the unknown but embraced it together. Anna leaned her head against Saliri's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for staying," and Saliri hugged her tightly and replied, "The journey is ours together." And Daniel knew, in that moment, that every fear, every loss, every challenge they had faced had led them to this peace and happiness, and the galaxy outside might be vast and uncertain, but here within their home they had found certainty, warmth, and the kind of love that could endure anything. And so life moved forward, calm, joyful, and full of promise. Saliri, once a hungry alien widow, had found purpose, family, and belonging. Daniel had found a partner, a protector, and a reason to hope, and Anna had found love, security, and the kind of magic only a family built on courage and heart could provide together. They faced every day with laughter, resilience, and a unity that no threat could ever dismantle, and the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if honoring the bond that had been formed and nurtured on that distant settlement that had become home. The end.